The Christmas dress was still wrinkled when I found her. 3 days after Christmas, I walked into my dark living room after working 3 consecutive 12-hour shifts in the emergency room. And there was Emma, my 16-year-old daughter, sitting motionless on our couch. She wore the same red velvet dress I'd bought her for Christmas dinner at my parents' house. Her makeup had long since smeared into dark circles under her eyes, and tear stains marked her cheeks like battle scars. Unopened presents sat scattered around her feet like forgotten promises. My heart stopped when I realized she'd never left the house since Christmas Eve. I'm Jan, 34 years old, and I've been raising Emma alone for 3 years since her father moved to Seattle for his job promotion. We live in suburban Indianapolis, where I work as head nurse in Metro General's emergency department. It's demanding work, but it pays well enough to keep us comfortable in our 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. My family has always been tight-knit, at least I thought so. My parents Robert and Patricia live 15 minutes away in the house where my sister Melissa and I grew up. Melissa is 31, married to Brad, and they have twin 8-year-old boys named Tyler and Trevor. She works part-time selling real estate, which gives her flexibility to be the kind of involved mother I sometimes envy. Every holiday since my divorce, the arrangement was simple and reliable. Emma would spend major holidays with my parents while I worked the hospital shifts that paid overtime and helped other nurses spend time with their families. It seemed perfect for everyone. Emma loved her grandparents, adored playing with Tyler and Trevor, and I could contribute to our household income while knowing she was surrounded by family love. Christmas Eve this year followed the same pattern I'd established since the divorce. I was scheduled for a double shift covering the emergency department while Dr. Martinez handled the overnight trauma cases. Christmas Eve in the ER is never quiet. We treated 2 car accident victims, 3 domestic violence cases, 1 heart attack, and a steady stream of holiday-related injuries ranging from cooking burns to ladder falls from roof decorations. Around 8 that evening, during a brief lull between patients, I texted Emma to check how Christmas dinner was going. The message delivered, but she never responded. I assumed she was having too much fun with Tyler and Trevor to check her phone. Kids that age live in the moment, especially during exciting family gatherings. What I didn't know was that Emma had arrived at my parents' house at exactly 5 o'clock, just as I'd arranged. She'd spent 2 hours getting ready, curling her long brown hair and applying the subtle makeup I'd taught her for special occasions. She was excited about the new earrings she'd bought for Patricia with money from her part-time job at the local bookstore. When Emma rang the doorbell, my father Robert answered with his usual warm smile, but something felt different. He hugged her, but the embrace was brief and awkward. Inside, she found the dining room table set for exactly 6 people. 6 chairs, 6 place settings, 6 cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. 6 everything. Patricia emerged from the kitchen wearing her favorite Christmas apron, the one with dancing reindeer that Emma had given her 2 years earlier. She looked at Emma with an expression that wasn't quite welcoming, wasn't quite warm. It was the look you give someone who's arrived at an inconvenient time. "Where should I sit?" Emma asked innocently, looking around the perfectly arranged table. Patricia's response cut through the Christmas atmosphere like a knife through wrapping paper. "There's no room, sweetie. Maybe next year we'll have a bigger table." Melissa appeared from the living room where Tyler and Trevor were playing with new video games, their excited voices creating a soundtrack of family joy that suddenly felt exclusive. She looked at Emma standing awkwardly in the dining room entrance, then at the table, then back at Emma, with an expression that suggested this was somehow Emma's fault for not understanding the situation. "You can grab something from the kitchen and eat in the living room if you want," Melissa offered with the casual tone you might use when suggesting someone take the last piece of pizza. Emma stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, processing the humiliation. Her grandparents' table, where she'd eaten hundreds of meals since childhood, suddenly had no place for her. The family that had welcomed her every holiday for 16 years was treating her like an unexpected guest who'd shown up without an invitation. "I think I'll just go home," Emma managed to say, her voice smaller than it had ever been. Nobody protested. Nobody said they'd make room. Nobody suggested rearranging chairs or eating in the larger living room. Patricia simply nodded and said, "Drive safely, honey. Maybe we'll see you soon." Emma walked to her car in the December cold, her hands shaking as she started the engine. The drive home took 12 minutes, during which she replayed the scene over and over, wondering what she'd done wrong, wondering why this year was different, wondering if she'd somehow misunderstood the invitation. When I finally came home 3 days later and saw her still in that Christmas dress, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The fabric around the left shoulder was torn, small but unmistakable rips that hadn't been there when I'd hung the dress in her closet a week earlier. "Emma, what happened to your dress?" I asked, settling beside her on the couch. She looked down at the torn fabric as if seeing it for the first time. "I tore it climbing over the fence," she whispered. "What fence? Why were you climbing over a fence?" That's when the truth came tumbling out, and my world shifted on its axis. Emma had driven home from my parents' house to find our house completely dark. In my rush to get to work that morning, I'd taken the only house key, assuming she'd be at my parents' until I returned from my shift. She'd spent 4 hours outside in 30-degree weather, trying to reach me while I was in surgery and couldn't answer my phone. Finally, desperate and freezing, she'd climbed over our back fence and broken into our own house through the basement window, cutting her dress and scraping her arms on the window frame. My 16-year-old daughter had spent Christmas night alone, hungry, and locked out of her own home because her family had rejected her and her mother was saving lives at the hospital. As she told me this story, I felt something inside me break and rebuild simultaneously. The break was my faith in my family, my trust in their love for Emma, my belief that blood relationships meant unconditional acceptance. The rebuilding was my resolve to ensure this never happened again. The next morning, December 26th, I called my mother before my coffee had finished brewing. I needed to thank them for including Emma and find out why she'd come home early. My voice was cheerful and unsuspecting. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to thank you for having Emma yesterday. She said she came home early, but I hope she wasn't any trouble." There was a pause, longer than normal, before Patricia responded. "Oh, Emma. Yes, well, she seemed a bit moody when she arrived. Very ungrateful for everything we'd prepared. She chose to leave early, and honestly, Jan, we were a little hurt by her attitude." Something in my mother's tone felt wrong, like a note played slightly off, key in a familiar song. Patricia had always adored Emma, bragged about her grades, shown off photos to her church friends. This cold description didn't match the grandmother I knew. Moody? That doesn't sound like Emma. What exactly happened? She just seemed unhappy about something. You know how teenagers can be. Maybe she wanted to be somewhere else, with friends or something. We tried to make her comfortable, but she insisted on leaving. I hung up feeling unsettled. Emma wasn't moody, especially not during holidays she'd been anticipating for weeks. I found her in her room, finally changed out of the Christmas dress but still curled under blankets like she was protecting herself from the world. "Honey, can you tell me exactly what happened at Grandma and Grandpa's house?" Emma's story unfolded slowly, painfully, like pulling splinters from a wound. She described arriving excited and ready to help with dinner preparation, as she always did. She talked about finding the table set for 6 people, about asking where to sit, about Patricia's casual dismissal. She described Melissa's suggestion that she eat in the kitchen like hired help. "Did anyone try to make room for you? Did anyone suggest changing the seating arrangement?" "No," Emma whispered. "They all just looked at me like I was supposed to understand why I wasn't welcome." I pulled out my phone and opened social media, something I rarely did but felt compelled to check. Melissa's Instagram account was full of Christmas photos from the day before. Picture after picture of the perfect family Christmas. Robert carving turkey, Patricia serving her famous stuffing, Tyler and Trevor playing with new toys, Melissa and Brad laughing over wine glasses. Emma wasn't in a single photograph. It was as if she'd never existed, never been part of this family for 16 years, never spent countless holidays creating these same memories. The photos showed 6 people having a wonderful Christmas dinner, and anyone viewing them would assume this was the complete family. I scrolled through the comments. Extended family members had liked and commented on the photos. Aunt Sarah wrote, "Beautiful family. Where's Emma though?" Uncle Mark asked, "Missing someone?" Cousin Jennifer commented, "Tell Emma I said, Merry Christmas." Melissa had responded to each of these comments, with variations of, "She couldn't make it this year," or "Emma had other plans." She was actively creating a narrative that Emma had chosen not to attend, that her absence was voluntary rather than the result of deliberate exclusion. My hand shook as I called Melissa directly. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice bright and artificial. "Jan, hope you had a good Christmas working. We missed you at dinner. I need to know exactly what happened with Emma yesterday." The brightness in Melissa's voice dimmed. "What do you mean?" "Emma came by and then left. She seemed like she didn't want to be there." "That's not what Emma tells me. She says you told her there was no room at the table." "Well, we had everything set up perfectly, and it would have been complicated to rearrange everything. You know how Mom gets about her table settings. So you're saying you turned away my 16-year-old daughter rather than add one more chair?" "It wasn't like that. January Emma has been difficult lately anyway. She's gotten very independent, very opinionated. Sometimes it's just easier to have a peaceful dinner without teenage drama." The words hit me like a physical blow. Difficult? Teenage drama? We're talking about Christmas dinner, not a diplomatic summit. What exactly has Emma done that makes her difficult? Melissa's tone became defensive, almost aggressive. She questions everything now. Last time she was over, she challenged Dad about his political opinions. She corrects Mom's stories. She acts like she knows better than adults, who have decades more experience. Those sound like signs of intelligence and growing maturity, not character flaws. Maybe that's the problem, January. You let her get away with too much. You treat her like an equal, instead of teaching her respect for authority. I ended the call feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My family hadn't just excluded Emma from Christmas dinner. They'd been building a case against her for months, documenting her normal teenage development as evidence of problematic behavior. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Later that afternoon, Emma showed me something that made everything crystal clear. She'd screenshotted a text message thread from Tyler's phone, which she'd been using earlier to charge her device when his phone accidentally synced her messages. The text thread was between Patricia, Melissa, and Brad, dated December 15th, 10 days before Christmas. Patricia had written, "We need to talk about the Emma situation for Christmas dinner." Melissa responded, "What do you mean? I think it's time Jan learned she can't just dump her responsibilities on us whenever it's convenient. Emma's behavior has become unacceptable, and we shouldn't have to deal with a disrespectful teenager during our family celebration." Brad had chimed in, "Totally agree. The girl needs boundaries that Jan obviously isn't providing. Maybe if she faces some consequences, Jan will step up her parenting." Patricia's final message in the thread made my blood turn to ice. "Then it's settled. We'll set the table for family only. If Jan asks, we'll say Emma chose to leave early. This might be the wake-up call they both need." This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in the heat of the moment. This was a calculated plan to humiliate my daughter and manipulate our family dynamic. They had conspired for over a week to exclude Emma from Christmas, and they had prepared a cover story to make it seem like her choice. I stared at those text messages until the words blurred, reading them over and over, trying to make them say something different. But the evidence was undeniable. My family had deliberately planned to hurt my child, and they had prepared lies to cover their cruelty. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, I sat in my kitchen and realized that everything I thought I knew about my family was wrong. The people I'd trusted to love and protect my daughter had instead conspired to reject and humiliate her. And they'd done it not out of space constraints or scheduling conflicts, but as some kind of lesson for me about parenting and responsibility. I was about to learn just how deep their betrayal ran. Over the next 2 days, I started paying attention to things I'd previously overlooked, memories that suddenly took on new meaning when viewed through this lens of deliberate exclusion. Emma and I spent December 27th talking about the past year, and disturbing patterns began to emerge. Thanksgiving hadn't actually been different because of Patricia's desire for an adults-only dinner, as I'd been told. Emma revealed that Patricia had called her directly the week before Thanksgiving and said the dinner was being simplified this year, and maybe she should spend the holiday with friends instead. Patricia's birthday party in October suddenly made sense too. Emma hadn't been sick that day as Melissa had told me. Emma had never even been invited. She'd assumed she wasn't included because it was an adult celebration, and I'd never questioned it because Melissa said Emma wasn't feeling well. Tyler and Trevor's birthday party in September followed the same pattern. Emma had been working at the bookstore that Saturday, but nobody had asked if she could switch shifts or come by after work. In previous years, family members always checked with work schedules before planning celebrations. I started thinking maybe I was being too sensitive, Emma told me as we curled up on the couch together. Like maybe I was imagining that things felt different. But now I realized they really were different. The more we talked, the more I understood that Emma had been experiencing a slow, systematic exclusion from family events for months. Each incident was small enough to seem reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a clear pattern of rejection. But why? What had motivated this gradual pushing away of a girl who'd been central to family gatherings for 16 years? I called my Aunt Susan, Patricia's younger sister, who lived 2 hours away but stayed in close touch with family news. Susan had always been direct and honest, sometimes to a fault. If anyone would tell me the truth, it would be her. "Susan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, honey. What's going on? Have Mom and Melissa said anything to you about Emma lately? Anything about her behavior or attitude?" There was a long pause before Susan answered, and when she did, her voice was careful and measured. "Jan, I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but since you're asking directly, yes. Your mother has mentioned some concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "She's worried that Emma is becoming too independent for her own good. She thinks maybe the divorce affected Emma more than you realize, and that she's acting out as a result." Patricia mentioned that Emma has been questioning adult decisions and showing what she called disrespectful attitudes toward family authority. My heart sank. Has she said anything specific? She told me Emma was getting rebellious about family traditions, that she wanted to make her own choices about how to spend her time instead of participating in family activities. "Patricia seemed to think you weren't providing enough structure or discipline." "Susan, Emma is 16 years old. Wanting some independence is completely normal development. She gets straight A's, works part-time, has never been in any trouble, and treats people with kindness and respect." "I know, honey. That's why I was surprised when Patricia said Emma might need professional help to deal with her behavioral issues." Professional help. My mother was telling extended family that Emma needed psychological intervention for normal teenage development. "Susan, did Mom say anything else? Anything about Christmas plans?" Another pause. "She mentioned that this year might be a good time for you and Emma to start some of your own traditions instead of always relying on the family to provide holiday celebrations." The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. My family hadn't just decided to exclude Emma from Christmas. They'd been building a narrative to justify that exclusion for months. They'd been spreading the story that Emma was troubled, that I was an inadequate single mother, and that both Emma and I needed to learn independence from family support. But I suspected there was more to this story than concern about Emma's development or my parenting skills. I decided to call my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd lived next door to my parents for 15 years and had become something of a family friend. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is January. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to ask if you've noticed anything different about my family lately." "Oh, hello, dear. What do you mean by different? Have my parents mentioned anything about Emma or about concerns with my parenting?" Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Well, I don't like to gossip, but your mother has seemed stressed lately. She mentioned that raising grandchildren is more work than she expected at her age." "Raising grandchildren?" "Emma doesn't live with them. She just visits for holidays and occasional weekends." "That's strange." Patricia made it sound like Emma was there much more often, like you depended on them for regular childcare. She said it was becoming difficult to manage, especially with your father's retirement reducing their income. Now we were getting to the real issue: money. My parents were facing financial pressures from Robert's retirement, and they viewed helping with Emma as an unwanted expense rather than a joy. I thought about all the times I'd assumed my parents enjoyed having Emma around. I'd never considered that they might view her presence as a financial burden. When she spent weekends with them, they fed her meals and provided transportation to activities. When she stayed overnight, they used extra utilities and provided entertainment. More significantly, I remembered how my ex-husband used to bring expensive wine and elaborate gifts to every family gathering. He earned significantly more than I did as an engineer, and his contributions to family celebrations had been substantial. Since the divorce, I'd brought what I could afford on a nurse's salary: a nice bottle of wine, a dessert from the grocery store bakery, flowers for Patricia. I was beginning to understand that Emma and I had become associated in my family's mind with taking rather than giving, with need rather than abundance. We represented obligation rather than celebration. But there was still one piece of this puzzle missing, and I suspected it involved Melissa's husband Brad. Emma had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around Brad lately, though she couldn't articulate why. I decided it was time to understand his role in this situation. I called cousin Jennifer, who was close to Melissa, and might have insights into Brad's perspective on family dynamics. "Jennifer, I need to ask you something sensitive about Brad and his opinions about Emma." "That's kind of specific, January. Is everything okay? I'm trying to understand some family tensions that have developed. Has Brad said anything to you about Emma or about concerns with her behavior?" Jennifer was quiet for several seconds before responding. "Jan, I probably shouldn't say this, but Brad has made some comments that made me uncomfortable. He seems to think Emma is growing up too fast and needs stricter supervision." "What kind of comments?" "He's mentioned that Emma is too independent for a 16-year-old girl, that she dresses too maturely, that she's allowed too much freedom with dating and social activities. He's suggested to Melissa that you're not providing appropriate oversight for a teenage daughter." I felt a chill run through me. Appropriate oversight of what exactly? "Brad seems to think teenage girls need more protection than you're providing Emma. He's made comments about how different things were when he was growing up, how girls weren't allowed to be so assertive or independent. He's told Melissa that Emma's confidence and independence are actually warning signs that she might be headed for trouble." The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. Brad wasn't just concerned about Emma's behavior, he was uncomfortable with her normal teenage development into a confident young woman. His solution was to pressure the family to restrict her activities and reduce her sense of independence. But the most disturbing revelation came at the end of our conversation when Jennifer mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Jan, there's something else Brad said that really bothered me. He told Melissa that if Emma continues on her current path, she might end up like girls who get into serious trouble in high school. He suggested that preventing her from feeling too welcome or comfortable in family settings might teach her that actions have consequences." Brad had been actively advocating for Emma's exclusion from family events as a form of psychological manipulation. He believed that making her feel unwanted and rejected would somehow improve her character and behavior. I hung up the phone realizing that Emma's exclusion from Christmas wasn't just about money or convenience. It was about a fundamental disagreement over what kind of young woman she should become. Brad wanted her diminished, uncertain, and dependent. My family had chosen his vision over supporting Emma's healthy development into a confident, independent person. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them with angry phone calls or emotional appeals. I was going to document everything I'd learned, compile evidence of their deliberate cruelty, and take action that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. My family thought they were teaching Emma and me a lesson about independence and consequences. They were about to learn what real consequences looked like. I spent the next 3 days conducting what I can only describe as a thorough investigation into my family's treatment of Emma. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined, and it extended far beyond our immediate family circle. My first revelation came from an unexpected source: Emma's guidance counselor at school. On December 29th, Mrs. Henderson called our house to schedule a meeting for early January. She wanted to discuss some concerns that had been brought to the school's attention regarding Emma's home situation. "Mrs. Henderson, what kind of concerns?" "Emma's grades are excellent, and she's never been in any trouble at school." That's exactly what makes these reports puzzling, January. In November, we received a call from someone identifying herself as Emma's grandmother, expressing worry about Emma's behavior at home and asking if we'd noticed any signs of acting out or emotional distress at school. My hand tightened on the phone. What exactly did this person say? The caller claimed that Emma had been showing signs of rebellion and disrespect toward family members, and suggested that Emma might be struggling with the effects of your divorce more than anyone realized. She asked if Emma seemed withdrawn, angry, or defiant in class. And what did you tell her? I explained that Emma is one of our most respectful and engaged students. She participates thoughtfully in class discussions, maintains excellent relationships with teachers and peers, and shows no signs of emotional distress or behavioral problems. The caller seemed surprised by this information. I felt sick to my stomach. Patricia had contacted Emma's school without my knowledge or permission, attempting to plant seeds of concern about Emma's mental health and home stability. She was trying to build an official record of Emma being a troubled teenager. Mrs. Henderson, did the caller request any specific actions from the school? She asked if we could monitor Emma more closely and report any concerning behaviors. She also inquired about counseling services available through the school, saying the family was considering intervention options. Patricia had been trying to create a paper trail, suggesting that Emma needed professional psychological help, using the school system to validate her narrative. If Mrs. Henderson had been less professional or less familiar with Emma, this call might have resulted in unnecessary scrutiny or interventions that could have followed Emma throughout her academic record. I thanked Mrs. Henderson and asked her to document our conversation, explaining that Emma was not experiencing any problems at home and that no family member should be contacting the school about her without my knowledge. After hanging up, I realized I needed to check whether Patricia's interference extended to other areas of Emma's life. I called Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's pediatrician, to ask if anyone had contacted her office about Emma. Dr. Chen, this is Jan calling about Emma's care. I need to know if anyone other than me has contacted your office about Emma in recent months. That's an unusual question, January. Is everything all right? I'm concerned that family members may have contacted various people in Emma's life without my knowledge. Has anyone called about Emma's health or requested information about her medical records? Let me check our call log. There was a pause while Dr. Chen reviewed records. Actually, yes. In October, someone calling herself Emma's grandmother contacted our office asking about Emma's mental health services and whether we'd made any referrals for counseling or psychological evaluation. My worst fears were being confirmed. What information was provided? None, of course. We explained that all medical information is confidential and can only be discussed with the patient or her legal guardian. The caller seemed frustrated by this response and asked if there were signs we'd noticed that might indicate Emma needed professional help. Patricia had been conducting a systematic campaign to establish that Emma was psychologically troubled. She'd contacted the school and the doctor's office, fishing for any information that might support her narrative or create official documentation of Emma being a problem child. But the investigation revealed something even more disturbing when I spoke with Emma's supervisor at the bookstore where she worked weekends. Mark, the store manager, mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Jan, I'm glad you called. I've been meaning to ask you about something. A few weeks ago, a woman came into the store claiming to be Emma's grandmother. She said she was concerned about Emma's work performance and asked if we'd noticed any problems with her attitude or reliability. What did you tell her? I was honest. Emma is one of our best employees. She's always on time, treats customers with respect, and takes initiative with store tasks. The woman seemed disappointed by this feedback and suggested that Emma might be hiding behavioral problems from us. This was beyond interference. This was sabotage. Patricia was actively trying to damage Emma's reputation with her employer, potentially jeopardizing her job and her sense of independence and accomplishment. Mark, did this woman ask for anything specific? She asked if we'd be willing to call her if Emma exhibited any concerning behaviors at work. She left her phone number and said the family was worried about Emma's development and needed all the support they could get in monitoring her activities. Patricia had tried to recruit Emma's employer as an informant in her campaign to build evidence against a 16-year-old girl whose only crime was growing into a confident young woman. As I compiled this information, I realized that Emma's exclusion from Christmas wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of systematic undermining. Patricia had been working methodically to create a record of Emma being troubled, difficult, and in need of intervention, while simultaneously reducing Emma's access to family support and validation. But why go to such elaborate lengths? The answer came from an unexpected conversation with my Uncle Mark, Robert's brother, who called on December 30th to check on Emma after noticing her absence from Melissa's Christmas photos. "Mark, can I ask you something about the family dynamics lately? Have you noticed anything different about how Mom and Melissa talk about Emma?" Funny you should ask. January Patricia has been mentioning concerns about Emma for months now. She's suggested that the girl might be heading down a troubling path, and that you might need family support to get her back on track. What kind of support? Well, this might sound strange, but Patricia has hinted that Emma might benefit from spending more time with family members who could provide structure and guidance. She's suggested that you're overwhelmed as a single mother and might need help with parenting decisions. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about excluding Emma from Christmas or undermining her reputation. Patricia and Melissa had been building a case that I was an inadequate parent and that Emma needed family intervention. "Mark, has anyone mentioned anything about living arrangements or custody considerations?" There was a long pause before Mark answered. "Jan, I probably shouldn't say this, but Patricia has mentioned that if Emma's behavior continues to deteriorate, the family might need to consider more drastic measures to help both of you." The full scope of their plan became clear. They weren't just trying to teach Emma and me a lesson about independence. They were building a foundation to argue that Emma needed to be removed from my care and placed with family members who could provide better guidance and structure. I realized that Brad's involvement wasn't coincidental. As Melissa's husband, he would benefit if they could convince the family that Emma should live with them instead of with me. Patricia's campaign to establish Emma as troubled and me as inadequate would support a case for changing custody arrangements. The Christmas exclusion wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was designed to trigger exactly the kind of family crisis that would justify intervention and demonstrate that our current arrangement wasn't working. But they had made one critical miscalculation. In their eagerness to build a case against Emma and me, they had created extensive documentation of their own manipulation and lies. Every phone call to the school, every conversation with her doctor, every attempt to recruit her employer as an informant, had left a trail of evidence that would ultimately protect Emma, rather than endanger her. I spent New Year's Eve compiling detailed notes about every conversation I'd had, every revelation I'd uncovered, and every instance of interference in Emma's life. By midnight, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of systematic emotional abuse, designed to justify separating a mother from her daughter. What my family didn't realize was that their elaborate plan had given me everything I needed to protect Emma and hold them accountable for their actions. They thought they were gathering evidence against us, but they had actually provided me with irrefutable proof of their own misconduct. The letter I was about to write would include every detail of their campaign, every lie they'd told, and every boundary they'd crossed. But more importantly, it would demonstrate to our entire extended family and community exactly who Patricia, Melissa, and Brad really were beneath their facade of concern and family values. They wanted to teach Emma and me about consequences. I was about to provide them with a masterclass on the subject. I spent the first 3 days of January developing what I can only describe as a comprehensive response strategy. This wasn't going to be an angry phone call or an emotional confrontation. I was going to document everything systematically and ensure that the truth about my family's behavior reached everyone who needed to know. My first step was gathering concrete evidence. I asked Emma to provide written statements about each incident of exclusion, including dates, specific conversations, and her emotional response to each situation. Her account was heartbreaking but detailed and consistent. I documented every phone call I'd made during my investigation, including the names of people I'd spoken with and summaries of what they'd revealed. Mrs. Henderson provided written confirmation that Patricia had contacted the school without my knowledge. Dr. Chen's office sent a formal note documenting the unauthorized inquiry about Emma's mental health. Mark at the bookstore wrote a letter describing Patricia's attempt to recruit him as an informant and confirming Emma's excellent work performance. I compiled screenshots of Melissa's social media posts showing the Christmas celebration with Emma conspicuously absent, along with the comments from family members asking about her. Most importantly, I had Emma's screenshots of the text message thread between Patricia, Melissa, and Brad, planning Emma's exclusion from Christmas dinner. This was smoking gun evidence that the exclusion was premeditated and coordinated. But evidence was only part of my strategy. I needed to understand the full scope of their network and ensure that my response reached everyone who had been affected by their lies or manipulation. I created a comprehensive contact list that included every extended family member, family friends, community members who knew Emma, and professional contacts who might have received misinformation about our family. This list included 23 people who deserved to know the truth about what had been done to Emma. I also researched the potential legal implications of Patricia's unauthorized contact with Emma's school and doctor. I consulted with a family law attorney who confirmed that Patricia's attempts to create false documentation about Emma's mental health could constitute defamation and interference with parental rights. The attorney provided me with template language for cease and desist documentation and advised me on how to protect Emma's records from future unauthorized inquiries. She also confirmed that the systematic exclusion of Emma from family events, combined with the campaign to undermine her reputation, constituted emotional abuse that could have legal consequences if it continued. Armed with this information, I began drafting the most important letter I'd ever written. This wasn't just a response to Christmas dinner. It was a comprehensive exposure of months of calculated cruelty toward a child. The letter began with a detailed timeline of events, starting with the gradual exclusion from family gatherings and ending with Christmas night. I included exact quotes from conversations, specific dates and times, and the names of witnesses who could verify each incident. I described Patricia's unauthorized contacts with Emma's school, doctor, and employer, including the specific lies she'd told and the false narrative she'd attempted to create. I documented Melissa's role in excluding Emma from events while creating false explanations on social media. Most damning, I revealed Brad's role as the architect of this campaign, including his inappropriate comments about Emma's development and his advocacy for using family rejection as a tool to control her behavior. The letter's power wasn't just in documenting what they'd done. It was in demonstrating the systematic nature of their cruelty and the careful planning that had gone into hurting a child. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. This was sustained emotional abuse with a specific agenda. But the letter's distribution strategy was what would make it truly effective. I wasn't just sending it to Patricia and Robert. Every extended family member would receive a copy, along with family friends who had been told lies about Emma's behavior. I prepared copies for Patricia's church community, where she'd been discussing her concerns about Emma's development. Melissa's real estate colleagues would receive copies, since she'd used her professional relationships to spread negative stories about our family. Most importantly, I prepared documentation for Emma's school and doctor that would create an official record protecting her from future unauthorized inquiries, while establishing that the concerns raised by Patricia were false and malicious. I also uncovered one final piece of evidence that made everything even more damning. When I helped Emma clean out her room on January 2nd, we found a shoebox under her bed containing cards and small gifts that she'd never mentioned receiving. Inside were birthday cards from Great Aunt Dorothy, Uncle Mark, and several other extended family members from throughout the past year. Each card contained money or gift cards, and some included personal notes expressing love and asking why they hadn't seen Emma at recent family gatherings. Emma looked at these cards with confusion. "I never got any of these," she said quietly. I realized that Patricia had been intercepting Emma's mail, including gifts and cards from family members. She'd been stealing from Emma while simultaneously telling people that no one cares about her anymore, as evidence of Emma's declining family relationships. One card from Great Aunt Dorothy was particularly significant. It contained a savings bond worth $500 for Emma's college fund, along with a note saying, "I hope this helps with your future plans, sweetheart. You make us all so proud." Patricia had stolen $500 from Emma's college fund while telling the family that Emma was ungrateful and troubled. This wasn't just emotional abuse, it was theft. I added this discovery to my documentation, including photographs of the intercepted cards and notes. I also contacted Great Aunt Dorothy to confirm that she'd sent these items and to let her know they'd been intercepted. Dorothy's reaction was explosive. That woman stole from Emma? She kept gifts that were specifically sent to a child? I explained the full situation to Dorothy, who immediately pledged her support and offered to provide testimony about Patricia's lies regarding Emma's behavior. She also mentioned that Patricia had been telling family members that Emma was difficult to shop for because she'd become too picky and demanding about gifts. By January 4th, I had assembled a comprehensive package of evidence that documented systematic emotional abuse, theft, defamation, and interference with parental rights. The package included witness statements, official documentation from Emma's school and doctor, photographs of evidence, and a detailed timeline of events. But more than evidence, I had a strategy for ensuring that Patricia, Melissa, and Brad faced meaningful consequences for their actions. The letter wouldn't just expose what they'd done. It would create social, professional, and potentially legal accountability that would prevent them from ever hurting Emma again. On January 5th, I prepared to deliver the letter that would change everything. Patricia expected angry phone calls or emotional confrontations that she could dismiss as single, mother stress, or teenage drama. Instead, she was about to receive documented proof of her own cruelty, distributed to everyone whose opinion she valued. The letter's opening line would set the tone for everything that followed. "You told my daughter there was no room for her at your table. Today, you'll learn there's no room for cruelty in mine." What happened next would demonstrate that actions truly do have consequences, and that protecting a child from family abuse sometimes requires exposing family secrets to the light of community judgment. On January 6th at 6 in the morning, I drove to my parents' house and placed a thick envelope on their front doorstep. Inside was the comprehensive letter I'd spent days crafting, along with copies of all evidence I'd gathered. The envelope was marked "Urgent, Family Correspondence" in my clear handwriting. I knew my parents woke early for coffee and morning news, so they would find the letter within minutes. I drove home and waited. The letter began with the words I'd carefully chosen. "You told my daughter there was no room for her at your table. Today you'll learn there's no room for cruelty in mine." What followed was 8 pages of documented evidence, starting with the Christmas exclusion and extending through months of systematic abuse. I included exact quotes from Patricia's unauthorized calls to Emma's school and doctor. I provided details about her attempts to recruit Emma's employer as an informant. I documented every lie, every manipulation, every instance of interference in Emma's life. The letter described Melissa's role in creating false narratives on social media while excluding Emma from family events. It revealed Brad's inappropriate comments about Emma's development and his advocacy for using family rejection as psychological manipulation. Most damning, I included photographs of the intercepted cards and gifts, along with documentation of the $500 savings bond that Patricia had stolen from Emma. I provided witness statements from extended family members who could verify the lies Patricia had told about Emma's behavior. The letter concluded with formal demands: immediate cessation of all interference in Emma's life, public acknowledgement of their lies, return of all stolen items, and agreement to supervised contact only if they wish to rebuild relationships based on honesty and respect. But the letter's real power lay in its distribution. Simultaneously with delivering it to my parents, I sent copies to every extended family member, every family friend who had been told lies about Emma, and every professional contact who might have received misinformation. Patricia's church pastor received a copy, along with the church secretary who had heard Patricia's concerns about Emma's behavior. Melissa's real estate broker received documentation of her lies about family dynamics. Brad's employer received information about his inappropriate involvement in emotionally abusing a minor. At 7:15, my phone rang. Patricia's voice was shrill with panic. "Jan, what is this letter? What are you trying to do to our family?" "I'm protecting my daughter from further abuse. Everything in that letter is documented fact. You can't send private family business to everyone we know. This is humiliating. Emma's humiliation on Christmas night was acceptable to you. My documentation of your cruelty is simply truth telling. You're destroying our reputation over a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding, Mom. You planned Emma's exclusion for weeks. You lied to cover it up. You stole from her. You tried to sabotage her relationships at school and work. This isn't family drama, it's systematic abuse." Patricia hung up, but the calls continued throughout the day. Extended family members contacted me to express shock and support. "Great," Aunt Dorothy called 3 times, each conversation making her angrier about the stolen savings bond. Uncle Mark called to apologize for not recognizing the manipulation sooner. Cousin Jennifer offered to provide additional testimony about Brad's inappropriate comments. Family friends expressed horror at Patricia's unauthorized contacts with Emma's school and doctor. By noon, Melissa was calling in a panic. Her real estate clients had received copies of the letter, and she was facing professional consequences. Her broker wanted to meet with her about the situation, and 2 clients had expressed concerns about working with someone involved in child abuse. "Jan, you have to send out a retraction. This is destroying my career. Your participation in emotionally abusing my daughter is destroying your career. I'm simply documenting what you did. It wasn't abuse. We were trying to teach Emma responsibility. By stealing her mail? By lying to her school? By excluding her from family events while telling everyone she chose not to attend?" Melissa couldn't answer these questions because there were no acceptable answers. She'd participated in systematic cruelty toward a child, and now she was facing consequences for those choices. The most satisfying call came from Brad's supervisor at his engineering firm. The company had a strict policy about employees whose personal conduct might reflect poorly on the organization. Brad's documented involvement in emotionally abusing a minor was being investigated by Human Resources. "This is insane!" Brad shouted when he called. "I was trying to help that girl learn proper behavior." By advocating for her exclusion from family events? By making inappropriate comments about her development? By recruiting adults to spy on her activities? Someone needs to teach her boundaries. The only person who needed to learn boundaries was you. You had no right to interfere in my daughter's life or advocate for her psychological manipulation. Throughout the day, the community response was overwhelmingly supportive of Emma and critical of my family's behavior. 3 neighbors called to offer testimony about seeing Emma outside in the cold on Christmas night. Emma's teachers contacted Mrs. Henderson to confirm that Patricia's concerns about Emma's behavior were completely unfounded. Even Patricia's church pastor called to express concern about her conduct and to clarify that the church had never endorsed her methods of addressing family conflicts. But the most powerful response came from the extended family. By evening, Patricia and Robert had received calls from 17 family members demanding explanations for their treatment of Emma. Several relatives threatened to boycott future family events if Patricia and Melissa weren't held accountable for their actions. Great. Aunt Dorothy was particularly effective in her response. At 82 years old, she commanded respect from the entire family, and her outrage about the stolen savings bond resonated with everyone who heard about it. Patricia has been stealing from a child while spreading lies about that same child's character, Dorothy told anyone who would listen. This isn't poor judgment, it's criminal behavior. Dorothy's support was crucial because it gave other family members permission to express their own concerns about Patricia's controlling behavior and Melissa's participation in family manipulation. By the end of the day, Patricia, Melissa, and Brad were socially isolated within the family and facing professional consequences in their careers. The letter had accomplished exactly what I'd intended. It had exposed their systematic cruelty while creating meaningful accountability for their actions. But more importantly, it had demonstrated to Emma that her mother would fight for her protection and that the extended family's love for her was real and strong. The overwhelming support she received from relatives, teachers, neighbors, and community members proved that the problem wasn't with Emma's character or behavior. The problem was with 3 adults who had chosen cruelty over kindness, manipulation over honesty, and control over love. And now everyone knew exactly who they really were. 6 months after that devastating Christmas, I'm sitting in my kitchen on a sunny July morning, watching Emma help her great Aunt Dorothy plant flowers in our backyard. The transformation in both Emma and our family dynamics has been remarkable, though the journey wasn't without its challenges. The immediate aftermath of the letter was intense. Patricia and Robert initially responded with anger and denial, but the weight of evidence and community reaction forced them to confront their behavior. Patricia's first instinct was to claim victimhood, to insist that her actions were motivated by love and concern for Emma's development. That narrative crumbled when great Aunt Dorothy confronted her about the stolen savings bond in front of the entire extended family at Uncle Mark's birthday party in February. Patricia had no defense for taking money specifically gifted to Emma, and her attempts to justify the theft only reinforced how deeply her behavior had damaged her own reputation. The turning point came when Patricia's pastor, Reverend Williams, suggested that she might benefit from counseling to address her controlling tendencies and dishonesty. Initially resistant, Patricia eventually agreed to therapy after several church members expressed concerns about her treatment of Emma. In therapy, Patricia discovered that her behavior toward Emma stemmed from her own insecurities about aging and losing influence within the family. Emma's growing independence triggered Patricia's fears about becoming less relevant, less needed, less central to family dynamics. Instead of celebrating Emma's healthy development, Patricia had tried to undermine it to maintain her own sense of importance. Melissa's transformation was more dramatic and ultimately more positive. The professional consequences she faced at work forced her to examine her marriage to Brad and his influence on her relationships with family members. When she realized that Brad had been systematically manipulating her perceptions of Emma and me to advance his own agenda, she made the difficult decision to separate from him. The separation led to individual therapy for Melissa, where she discovered that Brad's controlling behavior had extended far beyond his interference with Emma. He'd been isolating Melissa from independent relationships and decision-making for years, using Emma as a convenient scapegoat for broader family conflicts he'd helped create. Brad himself faced the most serious consequences. His employer conducted a thorough investigation of his documented involvement in emotionally abusing a minor, which resulted in formal disciplinary action and mandatory sensitivity training. Several colleagues distanced themselves from him professionally, and his reputation within the company suffered lasting damage. More significantly, Brad's behavior toward Emma became evidence in Melissa's custody proceedings regarding Tyler and Trevor. The family court was particularly concerned about Brad's documented advocacy for using psychological manipulation against children, and his visitation rights were initially restricted to supervised access only. By April, Brad had moved out of the family home and was living in an apartment across town. Tyler and Trevor, initially confused by the family upheaval, gradually began expressing relief about the decreased tension in their home environment. But the most beautiful transformation has been Emma's journey back to confidence and security. The overwhelming support she received from extended family members, teachers, neighbors, and community members proved that the love she'd always felt from her broader network was real and strong. Great! Aunt Dorothy became Emma's most vocal champion, establishing not only a college fund to replace the stolen money, but also creating an additional scholarship fund in Emma's name for other students facing family challenges. Dorothy's fierce protection of Emma inspired other family members to examine their own relationships with her more closely. Uncle Mark and his wife invited Emma to spend weekends with their family, creating new traditions and memories that helped heal the trauma of Christmas. Cousin Jennifer included Emma in her wedding planning, giving her a meaningful role in family celebrations that had once excluded her. Most importantly, Emma's relationship with Tyler and Trevor was preserved and strengthened. As Melissa gained clarity about Brad's manipulation, she encouraged her sons to maintain their close bond with Emma. The boys began spending regular time at our house, and Emma resumed her role as their beloved older cousin. Emma's academic performance remained excellent throughout this period, but her emotional resilience grew remarkably. The experience of watching her mother fight for her protection and seeing the community rally around her taught Emma valuable lessons about standing up to bullies and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate rather than diminish your growth. By June, Emma had decided to pursue nursing like her mother, inspired by witnessing how professional competence and personal integrity could create the strength needed to protect vulnerable people. She began volunteering at a local youth center, helping other teenagers navigate family conflicts and abuse situations. Patricia's journey toward accountability was slow, but ultimately meaningful. After 6 months of therapy, she wrote Emma a genuine apology letter that acknowledged the specific harm she'd caused and the lies she'd told. The letter didn't ask for immediate forgiveness, but committed to earning back Emma's trust through consistent, respectful behavior over time. Robert, who had been largely passive during the original conflicts, surprised everyone by taking a strong stand for change. He told Patricia directly that their behavior toward Emma had been cruel and inexcusable, and that rebuilding family relationships would require her to demonstrate genuine change rather than just apologize. The first supervised visit between Emma and her grandparents took place in May at our house, with me present to ensure Emma felt safe and supported. The conversation was awkward but honest, with Patricia accepting full responsibility for her actions without making excuses or requesting immediate forgiveness. Since then, Emma and Patricia have had 3 more supervised visits, each one slightly more natural than the last. Patricia now asks about Emma's interests and activities without offering criticism or unwanted advice. She's learning to celebrate Emma's independence rather than trying to control it. Melissa's transformation has been the most complete and inspiring. Free from Brad's influence, she's rediscovered her own values and priorities. She's become one of Emma's strongest advocates within the family, and has used her experience to help other women recognize signs of emotional manipulation in their own relationships. The broader family has also been transformed by this experience. Extended family members now pay closer attention to power dynamics and exclusion patterns in family gatherings. Great. Aunt Dorothy instituted new traditions specifically designed to ensure that all family members feel welcome and included in celebrations. Uncle Mark started hosting quarterly family dinners at his house, with explicit invitations to every family member and clear expectations about inclusive behavior. These gatherings have become opportunities for healing and rebuilding trust while establishing new, healthier family traditions. The professional consequences my family faced created lasting changes in their behavior patterns. Patricia's church involvement now includes volunteer work with family counseling services, where she's learning about healthy relationship dynamics. Melissa's real estate career recovered, but she's more conscious about maintaining professional boundaries and honest communication. Most importantly, Emma's experience has inspired changes in our broader community. Mrs. Henderson at the school implemented new policies requiring written consent from legal guardians before discussing student information with anyone claiming to be a concerned family member. Dr. Chen's office created clearer protocols for protecting minor patients from unauthorized inquiries. Mark at the bookstore established employee protection policies, preventing family members from interfering in workplace relationships without proper authorization. Today, as I watch Emma laughing with great Aunt Dorothy over their gardening project, I'm struck by how much stronger our family has become through this difficult process. Emma's confidence and joy have been fully restored, but she's also gained wisdom about protecting herself from manipulation and the importance of standing up for what's right. Our relationship as mother and daughter has deepened through this shared experience of standing up to family bullies and protecting each other. Emma learned that her mother would fight fiercely for her protection, and I learned that my daughter had the strength and grace to handle even deliberate cruelty with dignity and resilience. The extended family that emerged from this crisis is more honest, more inclusive, and more committed to celebrating, rather than controlling each other's growth. We lost some relationships that were based on manipulation and power, rather than genuine love. But we strengthened the relationships that were built on authentic care and respect. Looking back on that horrible Christmas night when Emma sat alone in our dark house, wearing a torn dress and believing herself unwanted, I'm amazed by how completely the situation has been transformed. Emma now knows beyond doubt that she is cherished by people who matter, that her mother will protect her fiercely, and that her own strength and character can overcome even calculated cruelty. The family that once excluded her now celebrates her achievements and supports her dreams. The adults who tried to manipulate her development now respect her independence and decision-making. The community that was told lies about her character now knows the truth about her integrity and resilience. Most importantly, Emma learned that standing up to bullies, even family bullies, is not only possible but necessary for protecting yourself and others who might face similar treatment. Her experience has inspired her to pursue advocacy work and to use her voice to protect other young people facing family manipulation or abuse. This Christmas will mark 1 year since that devastating night, but this year Emma will be surrounded by people who truly love and value her. Great. Aunt Dorothy is hosting dinner specifically to celebrate Emma's strength and our family's healing. Uncle Mark and Cousin Jennifer are planning surprises to make this Christmas magical rather than traumatic. Even Patricia and Melissa will be welcome, if they continue demonstrating respectful, supportive behavior toward Emma. Their inclusion will be based on their actions rather than their family status, and Emma's comfort and safety will remain the priority in all family planning. The lesson I've learned from this experience is that protecting the people we love sometimes requires us to challenge the people we're supposed to love. Family relationships that are built on manipulation, control, and emotional abuse aren't worth preserving if it means allowing vulnerable members to be hurt. But I've also learned that most people, when confronted with clear evidence of their cruelty and meaningful consequences for their behavior, are capable of growth and change. Patricia's transformation from a controlling manipulator into someone learning to celebrate Emma's independence has been remarkable to witness. The letter I wrote that January morning didn't just expose their cruelty, it created accountability that led to healing and growth for everyone involved. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to hold them accountable for harmful behavior and give them the opportunity to become better people. Emma's story has become an inspiration to other families dealing with similar dynamics. When adults choose to exclude, manipulate, or undermine children rather than support their healthy development, the consequences should be swift, clear, and meaningful. But more importantly, children facing family abuse should know that they deserve protection, advocacy, and love. Emma's experience proves that with strong support and clear boundaries, families can heal from even systematic cruelty and emerge stronger than before. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between keeping peace with family members and protecting someone you love? How did you handle the pressure to stay quiet when speaking up felt risky but necessary? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more real, life stories about family dynamics, standing up to manipulation, and finding strength in difficult situations. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about how courage and clear boundaries can transform even the most challenging family relationships. Thank you for listening to Emma's story, and mine. Remember that protecting the people we love is always worth the temporary discomfort of confronting family cruelty. You are stronger than you think, and the people who truly matter will support you when you stand up for what's right. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love.